Hey folks, this is Jason Lewis, the producer of the From the Shadows podcast. I just want to remind you about our website, fromtheshadowspodcast.com. We have a Facebook page. We would appreciate it if you like and follow. Also, join our discussion group on Facebook called After the Shadows. We have a Twitter feed. Please follow us on Twitter. It can be found with @podcast_from. Follow us on Instagram at From the Shadows Podcast. We have a YouTube channel. Go to the search bar at YouTube and put From the Shadows Podcast, and please subscribe to that channel. We are also on the Odyssey Radio Network, and we can be found there at odyssey1.com. We're still on the traditional podcatchers that everybody loves to listen to us on. We get a lot of feedback, so please rate the podcast and communicate with whether you're on Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, or Google Podcasts. We're there, and we appreciate it when you leave comments for us. We also have a Patreon page. It can be found at www.patreon.com/FromTheShadows. You can receive books, stickers, coffee mugs, and special content just for our Patreon subscribers. Check it out for yourself and see what packages that we have to offer. Well, that's all I have for you right now, folks, and thanks for being a part of the From the Shadows podcast family. So with that being said, let's get this episode started.
So, the weather is turning pretty crappy outside here in Ohio. And seeing as my job is walking around delivering packages in this crappy weather, oftentimes I wonder what it'd be like to have an inside job. And I know you guys both, should I trade in my postal job for a prison job or not? What do you guys think?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No, it wouldn't be worth it.
What do you think, Howler?
I worked in a jail, so jails are different than prisons because they're pre-trial detainees. So a lot of times they're not there very long, or they're trying to do their best to get out, or something like that. But it's changed so much since in the 30 plus years since I worked in the jail. You talk about the cold weather. We had certain. The sheriff I worked for was an old school. I'm gonna use the term Democrat just one time. I normally don't do that, but he was an old school Democrat that really. He was just a good dude in a lot of ways. Now, not so much in a couple ways, but in a lot of ways. So we had the homeless people. Now, that's back before this big homeless explosion that they seem to have in some cities now. We just had 3 or 4 that everybody knew they were just bums, And when the weather would get like this, he'd call down to jail, or he'd walk to the jail and say, hey, if anybody rings the bell and needs a night place to stay, just let them in. Because there was an alley that ran behind the jail, and these bums, I can think of this one, his name was Charlie Beck, and he would come up through there, and it had a bell for the cops to, the officers to get through. And he would, if it was real cold like this, he would come up there and push the bell, and you'd talk on through an intercom or maybe open the sally port door, and he'd say, "Oh, it's cold. Can I spend the night?"
Kind of like a Cletus on Andy Griffith or something.
Absolutely, just like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd open the door and let him in, and he'd want a cup of coffee or something. And hey, one night I let him in, and we had holding cells right down there by the booking desk, and they were usually for badasses or drunks or stuff like that. But that's where you'd put the homeless people or drunks or people that needed sleep. So I had him in holding 2, and the city brought a guy in that was drunk and high and fighting, and we got him thrown in this holding 1. And he kept pushing this emergency button that rings in the dispatch. It rings 2 or 3 places because it's for a freaking emergency, right? And you would tell him to quit pushing the button, and he would say, "Screw you." And finally we could there was a little thing we could trip up in the dispatch to where it quit ringing. So then he started kicking the door, and he's kicking the door, and he's kicking the door. And of course, down Charlie my homeless guy's next door, and he gets up and rings his buzzer and goes, "Dude, can't you shut him up?" And I said, I don't know. This ain't the Best Western, Charlie. I mean, he's to jail. So it goes on and on and on. And finally, this is back in the early 90s, 91, 92 maybe, when the pepper spray first came out, right? And that was everybody. That was everybody. They pepper sprayed every dog. Every chance the cops got to spray somebody, they sprayed it because it was the magic dust, right? Well, when you work in jail like that, you don't get to spray anybody because everybody's sprayed before they get there. So I went over to that door and I opened the window and I told this guy, I said, "Hey, you kick that effing door one more time and I'm going to mace you." And I closed the door, and I no sooner, and there was 2 state troopers in there that was giving a guy a DWI, and they were running the BAC machine because it was in the jail there.
Mm-hmm.
And they're real prim and proper. And I ended up working with both of them later when I was a trooper. One of them retired as a captain, the other one retired as a sergeant. But the one real prim and proper one says, "I don't think you can do that." And he starts quoting some state police rules on Mason people that are in custody. Okay. So before I can answer him, the guy starts kicking the door again. I walk over to that desk and I open the bottom drawer and I take that can of pepper spray and big old handful of brass Folgers flat keys. So you screws out there don't know what I'm talking about. And I walk over and I open that because I don't know if he wants me to open the door and get in a fight or whatever. And I would have just hated to damage him. So I opened that food truck door and I said, "Hey, what did I just tell you?" And he bent down there, and it's about waist high. People working in jail know what I'm talking about. It's about waist high, and he has to bend over, and he starts to say, "I don't give a F what you said." And I stuck that mace in there, and I went, shh, like I was spray painting an Amtrak car down at the railroad. And he fell over backwards like I'd shot him in the face with a shotgun. And I slammed that door shut and closed it. And of course, that one trooper says, "Man, I don't think you should have done that." And the other one says, "Oh, I appreciate it. You told him you were going to do it, and you did it. You just got to stick with your word."
It's like you're raising kids, right?
I tell you, that place on a warm Saturday night, it would be a madhouse. I mean, the absolute madhouse. And what happens is city cops and people that live in the city or mess with the cops know they're like pack animals, right? Black and white drivers. And they get these people wound up or start a fight with them or something. And then the first thing I want to do is just drive up to jail and dump them off in your lap. Now, I don't know if I told this story, and forgive my older audience that has heard it, but I'm going to tell you another story that because the one guy, the perpetrator, is dead. So I feel like I could voice this one. But I worked with a fat guy named Gene, and I think I told this story not too long ago. And did I tell about, you two stop me if I'm going off. Did I tell you about him punching a guy that wasn't looking?
No.
No.
I don't.
I've told so many stories. My wife will tell you. She don't like, she's heard it all. She was in the other room when I started talking.
That's why she's not on the podcast, because we don't want her to stop.
So, hey, it was the flood of 93, and the guy that trained me in the jail was a big old heavy guy, and he had a lot of faults, but he was a prince of a human being, right? He had been divorced. The wife run off and let him. He had these teenage kids he was trying to raise. He had one time, before I started, he had been the jail administrator, and they say he came in one day and told the sheriff, "Hey, I need to get busted down the jailer, and because I got too much going on with raising the kids, and I don't need to stress all this stuff." And the sheriff says, "What if I say no?" And he said, "Well, I'm going to quit then." So he went from being the jail administrator, everybody's boss, to just being a dude behind a typewriter booking people. But he just knew his stuff. Well, when the flood came, the river broke its banks, and there was loot, and there was all kinds of stuff. So the sheriff got a few of the old guys out of jail and had them in a John boat working on the river. So about midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, sometime, these state troopers bring us drunk in. Maybe it was city cops, whatever. But I ended up sitting down at the booking desk with a drunk, and the first thing you do is make the cops leave because if they're the ones arguing with him and they leave, these people usually calm down. You tell them, hey, there's your phone. Call somebody, come up here and make your bond, and you can go home, which was where I was at. I'm at a booking desk. This gentleman was standing at a payphone that calls collect outside of the jail, and he's running his mouth the whole time, and I've got an intern standing behind me. Shortly before the cops brought him in, this guy, Gene, the jailer, had came in off working his river duty, and he's hot and he's sweaty. And what guys would do is you'd let him in the jail, and they'd go to the kitchen because it had this gigantic commercial kitchen with 2 or 3 walk-in coolers, and dudes would just make coffee and make ham and eggs and just, I know it sounds goofy for me to tell you, but it was dudes would just go back there and cook, right? So Gene's back there cooking it, making an egg sandwich by himself when they bring this drunk in, and he stays in the kitchen the whole time. But this drunk is on the phone talking. He told cops he was going to kick somebody's ass. Now he's looking at me, standing on this phone, looking straight in my eyes, telling me he's going to kick my ass. And he calls him on the phone. He says, you got to come up here and get me, because if you don't, I'm going to beat the shit out of these 2 deputies. I don't care if they got badges. And he's going on and on and on and on and on. And I, about 3 minutes into this ass kicking tirade, he's talking. This fat guy, Gene, walks around the edge of the door frame, and he's got a cup of coffee in his left hand, one of them fat bottom cups. And he's standing behind this guy this guy's right. And he makes a right hook around this guy and hits him right in front of his ear. And this dude drops like a sack of potatoes. Boom. And then he takes his left hand that's holding that coffee cup and sucks a little coffee off the back of his hand where it spilled. Reaches over, hangs the phone. Hey, and then reaches over and hangs the phone up. And says, who's working upstairs? Well, upstairs was the dispatchers, and they had all this recording. So as soon as he said, who's working upstairs, the upstairs guys was listening to us. And there was an old guy upstairs that was banned from the jail. He's dead too, Wayne. And he said, don't worry, Gene, I was recording the parking lot. I don't understand these recorders anyway. So the next morning, and we just dragged this guy in holding one right there and let him in the floor. The next morning at 6:30 or 7, we're waking everybody up. And he comes out here and says, we open the door and he says, why'd you hit me? He doesn't even know who hit him.
oh my God. Nowadays you guys would be sued and have lost your job.
Yeah. Well, that's the way it was back in the old days.
Or they just been the video of the parking lot. Either way.
Yeah, whatever. That's the way it was. So anyway, that's just 2 jails. Huh?
You were talking about the pepper spray, and I'm complaining about the post office. 21 years in, and I have never pepper sprayed a dog.
Well, that's why they like you so much.
No, they hate me.
That's why they like you.
They hate me because I'm just going to give every mailman that's listening a tip. Never pepper spray a dog. Always kick them. And people might get mad at me, but here, if anybody trained their dog not to do something bad with pepper spray, then they would respond to the pepper spray. But people that train their dogs not to do something bad, they always whack them on the butt or smack them on the nose. So a dog comes at me, I just smack them on the nose or kick them in the butt, and then they get the picture because that's what their owners do.
Right. Yeah.
Pepper spray. They don't know what that is. They're just mad. And the next day, guess what?
That's
they
because
want to get you.
You don't work in a sophisticated neighborhood with that mail pouch. I can see that already. You must have some illiterate dogs. You must have some illiterate dogs out there in Cleveland or wherever.
Listen. I guess I just look juicy. I look like a big piece of juicy.
Well, I didn't want to say that. I didn't want to say that.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the From the Shadows podcast. Until next time, never shy away from the darkness or what may be lurking in the shadows. We are out.